Chapter 1. The Waters that Rewrote History. What if everything you thought you knew about human history was wrong? What if the story of civilization didn't begin 6,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia, but was actually a restart button pressed by the most devastating event in human memory? Tonight, we're going to explore a possibility that mainstream archaeology desperately wants you to ignore. The idea that advanced civilizations existed before the Great Flood, and that rising waters didn't just change coastlines, they erased entire chapters of human achievement from the historical record. But first, let me paint you a picture. Imagine you're standing on a beach 15,000 years ago. The world would look completely different. That ocean stretching endlessly before you. It would be dry land extending for hundreds of miles. The English Channel wouldn't exist. Britain would be connected to Europe by rolling green hills. The Bering Strait would be a vast land bridge where people could walk from Asia to America without getting their feet wet. All those places were real. People lived there, built communities there, developed technologies there. And then something happened that changed everything forever. Around 12,800 years ago, the Earth experienced what scientists call the Younger Dryas period. Massive glacial lakes, some larger than the Great Lakes combined, suddenly burst through their natural dams. The result wasn't gradual sea level rise over thousands of years. It was catastrophic flooding that raised global ocean levels by over 400 feet in just a few centuries. Think about that for a moment. 400 feet of vertical rise. Every coastal city, every river valley settlement, every harbor town, all of it disappeared beneath the waves. We're talking about millions of square miles of inhabited land simply vanishing from existence. But here's what's truly mind-bending. We have geological proof this happened, yet we act like it has nothing to do with human history. Ice core samples, sediment layers, underwater topography. All the evidence confirms this massive flooding event occurred exactly when human civilization was supposedly getting started. So where are all the people who lived on those drowned lands? Where are their cities, their monuments, their seabirds and marine mammals? Rivers offered fresh water and attracted game animals. These weren't empty wastelands. They were the richest, most desirable real estate on the planet. Yet we're supposed to believe that for hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived in these prime locations without developing permanent settlements, sophisticated technologies, or complex societies. Does that really make sense to you? The truth is far more unsettling. We haven't found evidence of advanced prehistoric civilizations, not because they didn't exist, but because they're underwater. Only a tiny fraction of the ocean floor has been systematically explored for archaeological remains. The vast majority of what might remain from humanity's deeper past is lying beneath hundreds of feet of water and thousands of years of accumulated sediment. What if the flood didn't just drown land? What if it drowned time itself? Chapter 2. Memories carved in stone. Before we dive deeper into what was lost, we need to examine what survived. Because scattered across the globe, we're finding evidence that somebody knew this catastrophe was coming. And they tried to preserve something for us to discover. Let me take you to a barren hillside in southeastern Turkey, where nothing should have happened. The landscape around Göbekli Tepe stretches flat and empty in every direction. No rivers provide easy irrigation. No mountains offer valuable minerals. No natural harbors justify human settlement. By every logical measure, this should be forgotten land that ancient peoples would have walked past without a second glance. Yet when archaeologists began digging here in the 1990s, they found something that shouldn't exist according to everything we thought we knew about human development. Massive stone pillars arranged in perfect circles, each one carved from single blocks of limestone weighing several tons, decorated with intricate symbols that no living person can fully interpret. The oldest sections of Göbekli Tepe have been radiocarbon dated to around 9600 BCE. That makes it over 11,000 years old. Older than pottery, older than writing, older than agriculture itself. Someone at the very end of the last ice age quarried these massive stones, transported them across difficult terrain, and arranged them in complex geometric patterns without metal tools, domesticated animals strike. Abstract symbols appear alongside them, crescents, geometric patterns that repeat across the site with mathematical precision. Some researchers believe these carvings represent astronomical observations, a star map carved in stone to track celestial movements. Others think they depict a creation story that predates all known religions. There are even those who suggest Göbekli Tepe preserves the memory of a catastrophic event, a warning embedded in sculpture meant to survive whatever disaster had already occurred. But the most unsettling aspect of Göbekli Tepe isn't what was built there. It's what happened after it was built. The people who created this extraordinary site didn't abandon it when they were done. They didn't let it crumble into ruins like countless other ancient structures. They buried it. Deliberately and methodically, they filled in the spaces between pillars with tons of stone and debris, sealing the entire complex beneath a man-made hill. This wasn't destruction. It was preservation, as if they wanted it to survive the ages, just not be visible, as if they were protecting it from something, or saving it for people who would come much later. People like us. And Göbekli Tepe isn't alone in this strange pattern. Similar sites are emerging across the region. Karahan Tepe, Neveli before it was flooded by a modern dam. Each one older than conventional history says should be possible. Each one built without the supposed prerequisites for monumental architecture. And one by one, they were all deliberately buried by their creators. What were they trying to preserve? What did they know that we've forgotten? If you're starting to question everything you learned about ancient history, hit that like button, because we're about to explore how these mysterious monuments connect to flood stories that appear in every culture on Earth, telling the same impossible tale of survival and loss. Chapter 3. The universal story that shouldn't exist. Throughout human history, some stories stay local, shaped by familiar rivers and regional fears, confined to the cultures that created them. But there's one story that refuses to behave this way. A story that somehow emerged everywhere at once. Greek mythology gives us Deucalion and Pyrrha repopulating the world after Zeus's flood. Aboriginal Australians speak of the great waters that covered the land in the Dreamtime. Different continents, different languages, different gods, but always the same fundamental structure, always the same ending. Now, mainstream anthropologists have a neat explanation for this uncomfortable pattern. They call it convergent myth-making, the tendency for similar stories to emerge independently in response to similar experiences. Since every early civilization developed near rivers, and rivers flood, traumatized survivors would naturally create cosmic flood narratives to process their local disasters. This explanation held comfortably for decades. Flood myths were filed away as interesting examples of how human psychology processes trauma, useful for understanding cultural development, but irrelevant to actual history. The matter seemed settled. But then researchers began to count more carefully, and the counting revealed something that doesn't fit the comfortable explanations. These aren't just similar themes scattered randomly across cultures. The structural similarity is too precise, too organized, too universal to be coincidental cultural invention. The survivors in these stories don't just rebuild civilization, they remember it. They carry forward specific knowledge that allows the world to continue. Utnapishtim receives divine wisdom and immortality. Manu brings back the concepts of agriculture and sacred law. Noah preserves not just animal species, but the idea of covenant between divine and human. They aren't just lucky individuals who happen to survive. They are deliberate transmitters, chosen specifically to carry certain knowledge across a catastrophic divide. The flood in these stories doesn't merely destroy, it selects what deserves to survive and what should be forgotten. And what survives isn't random. It's always the fundamental building blocks of civilization. How to grow food, how to organize society, how to maintain relationships with the divine, how to begin again when everything familiar has been swept away. This suggests that these myths serve a deeper function than simple storytelling. They're templates for survival. Warnings, miraculous preservation, supernatural guidance. What if these are metaphorical ways of describing real preparations, real knowledge, real technologies that allowed some communities to survive what others could not? Drop a comment below and let me know. Do you think ancient flood stories are mythology or compressed historical memory? Because what we're about to discover in underwater ruins around the world suggests our ancestors weren't telling fairy tales. They were trying to warn us about something that could happen again. The flood stories also share another disturbing characteristic. They're presented as foundational narratives that separate the ancient world from the world of historical memory. Everything before the flood is prehistory, dimly remembered, incompletely understood, populated by giants and heroes with impossible achievements. Everything after the flood is the beginning of the world we recognize, where human limitations are clearly defined. This narrative structure suggests that the flood represents more than physical catastrophe. It marks what scholars call an epistemological break, a fundamental change in how humans understood their place in the world. Whatever knowledge, technologies, or social structures existed before the flood became literally unthinkable afterward, preserved only in fragments wrapped in mythological language that later generations would interpret as fantasy rather than memory. Chapter 4: Secrets Beneath the Rising Tide. The next clue to our lost past lies not in ancient texts or buried monuments, but beneath the waves themselves, where real cities wait in the darkness, their streets still following original paths laid down thousands of years before the pyramids were built. In the shallow waters off the coast of Israel, a discovery was made that changes everything we thought we knew about prehistoric human capabilities. Atlit Yam isn't a mythical underwater city or a geological formation shaped by currents. It's a 9,000-year-old settlement with stone-built houses, paved areas, and a freshwater well that still stands intact after millennia beneath the Mediterranean. When marine archaeologists first explored the site, they found evidence of a sophisticated coastal community. The residents buried their dead in organized cemeteries marked by standing stones. They had skilled craftsmen who worked with advanced tools. They had built and retreat to higher ground. But Atlit Yam is just the beginning of what we're finding beneath the waves. Off the coast of Greece lies Pavlopetri, perhaps the most complete underwater Bronze Age city ever discovered. Here, marine archaeologists have mapped not just scattered foundations, but an intricate urban plan, with roads wide enough for ancient carts, building foundations showing individual room layouts, courtyards where families gathered, and storage areas where grain was kept for difficult seasons. This isn't just a settlement, it's a sophisticated city over 5,000 years old, with a planned street grid that wouldn't look out of place in a modern urban planning textbook. The preservation is so remarkable that divers can literally swim down ancient streets and peer into rooms where people once conducted their daily lives. Near the legendary city of Dwarka in western India, sonar scans have revealed massive stone walls, intricately carved steps, and temple foundations that match descriptions from ancient Sanskrit texts many scholars once dismissed as purely mythological. The structures show geometric patterns, too regular to be natural formations, lying beneath the Arabian Sea in configurations that suggest planned construction rather than random geological processes. But here's what should really keep you up at night. All of these underwater cities were discovered by accident, in relatively shallow water near modern coastlines. They represent just the outermost edges of what was once a much larger coastal zone that supported human civilization. If we're finding organized urban settlements at the very margins of the drowned landscape, what might lie deeper in the areas that were once the prime real estate of the ancient world? Make sure you're subscribed, because we're about to explore discoveries that mainstream archaeology is desperately trying to suppress. Evidence that our ancestors possessed technologies and knowledge that challenges everything we've been taught about human development. Consider this uncomfortable thought experiment. If archaeologists from the future wanted to understand our civilization, but they could only excavate areas currently more than 400 feet above sea level, what would they conclude? They might find scattered mountain towns and mining operations, but they would miss every major coast shores, perhaps in greater numbers and sophistication than anything we found on dry land. But those shores are gone, and so is everything that once stood on them. Standing on any modern beach, you're looking at a boundary that didn't exist 12,000 years ago. Somewhere beneath those waves, ancient streets still follow their original paths. Wells still hold fresh water. Sacred spaces still wait in the darkness. The difference is that we've barely begun to look for them. Chapter 5. Cities that time forgot. What we've discovered in accessible shallow waters represents only the beginning of a much larger mystery. But even these glimpses into our underwater past reveal sophisticated urban planning, advanced construction techniques, and complex societies that supposedly didn't exist before the rise of agriculture. The implications become staggering when you consider the pattern. Every underwater city discovered so far was found in shallow, accessible water, close to modern coastlines. These are just the outermost edges of what was once a vast coastal civilization that we've systematically ignored because we're not equipped to explore it. But some researchers have refused to accept this limitation. In recent years, advances in underwater archaeology, deep-sea scanning technology, and marine robotics have begun to penetrate deeper into the continental shelves, where our missing history might be waiting. Off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni Monument has sparked decades of controversy. This massive underwater structure features perfectly straight edges, right-angle corners, and geometric patterns that suggest artificial construction rather than natural rock formation. The monument rises from the seafloor in a series of terraced steps, with what appears to be carved channels, roads, and even tunnel-like openings. Mainstream geologists argue that Yonaguni is simply an unusual but natural rock formation, carved by ocean currents and erosion. But marine geologist Masaki Kimura, who has spent decades studying the site, points to features that seem impossible to explain through natural processes alone. Tool marks on the stone surfaces, post holes that suggest wooden structures once stood there, and quarrying marks that indicate deliberate extraction of stone blocks. The dating of Yonaguni remains coordination. Perhaps most intriguing are the discoveries off the coast of Cuba. where sonar imaging has detected what appears to be geometric structures on the seafloor at depths of over 2,000 feet. The formations show regular patterns, right angles, and symmetrical arrangements that are difficult to explain as natural geological features. The extreme depth means these structures, if artificial, would have been built when sea levels were dramatically lower, potentially during or before the last ice age. But here's where the story takes a disturbing turn. Many of these underwater discoveries face the same institutional resistance we've seen with land-based controversial sites. Research permits are denied, funding disappears, and academic careers suffer when researchers push too hard for deeper investigation of sites that challenge accepted timelines. The official archaeological position remains that complex urban civilizations only emerged after the development of agriculture, around 10,000 years ago. Any evidence suggesting earlier sophistication is dismissed as misinterpretation, wishful thinking, or outright fraud, regardless of the physical evidence. This raises uncomfortable questions about how scientific knowledge is controlled, and by whom. If underwater sites contain evidence that human civilization is far older and more sophisticated than we've been taught, why would there be institutional pressure to suppress rather than investigate these discoveries? Share this video with someone who's ready to question the official story, because what we're about to explore next shows that the suppression of inconvenient archaeological evidence isn't limited to underwater sites. The resistance to exploring our underwater past becomes even more puzzling when you consider that we have the technology to investigate these sites thoroughly. Deep-sea robotics, sonar mapping, and underwater excavation techniques are more advanced than ever before. The only thing preventing comprehensive exploration of the drowned continental shelves is institutional will and funding that mysteriously dries up whenever researchers get too close to discoveries that might rewrite human history. But the evidence we've already found, even in limited shallow water investigations, paints a picture of human capabilities that extend much further into the past than mainstream archaeology is willing to acknowledge. These weren't simple fishing villages or temporary seasonal camps. They were organized plain sight, disguised as ordinary hills that local people have walked past for generations, without suspecting what lies beneath their feet. In West Java, Indonesia, Mount Padang rises gently from the landscape, like countless other unremarkable hills across the archipelago. Its slopes are covered in wild grass and scattered basalt blocks, making it look like a perfect spot for weekend hikes and children's games. Nothing about its appearance suggests that beneath the surface lies one of the most controversial archaeological discoveries of the modern era. But in the early 2010s, when Indonesian geologists and archaeologists began probing deeper into Mount Padang's structure, using ground-penetrating radar, core drilling, and seismic tomography, they discovered something extraordinary. This wasn't a natural hill at all. It was a massive artificial construction, with multiple layers of deliberately arranged stone extending deep underground. The deeper they looked, the more elaborate the structure became. Chambers, columns, stacked terraces, walls of cut rock, arranged in patterns too precise to be natural. Underground corridors and rooms stretched through the interior like a buried city. Stone blocks weighing several tons had been quarried, shaped, and positioned with geometric precision that rivals modern engineering. And then they analyzed organic material found between the stone layers. Radiocarbon dating returned results that shouldn't have been possible. Evidence of human construction activity dating back over 20,000 years, nearly 10,000 years older than Göbekli Tepe, and pushing human monumental architecture back into the last ice age. If these dates were accurate, Mount Padang would represent the oldest monumental architecture ever discovered, fundamentally challenging everything archaeology had established about the development of human civilization. And that's when the real controversy began. Mount Padang wasn't destroyed by natural disasters or lost to time. It was discovered, studied, documented, and then systematically buried again. Not by Earth, but by institutional silence. The academic reaction was swift and decisive. Papers presenting the radiocarbon data were contested, then withdrawn from publication. Excavation permits were suddenly revoked. Research funding vanished overnight. The Indonesian archaeologists who had made the discovery found themselves about human development would need fundamental revision. The assumption that complex societies only emerged after agriculture would be shattered. The entire narrative of human progress, from simple hunter-gatherers to sophisticated builders, would require complete reconsideration. Today, Mount Padang still stands in West Java, its secrets sealed beneath layers of stone, soil, and bureaucratic denial. The core samples still exist in storage facilities, their radiocarbon dates unchanged by academic disapproval. But the official story has reverted to the safe, familiar version. Mount Padang is just a hill with some scattered stones, probably built a few thousand years ago as a ceremonial site. Nothing more. Nothing that challenges established timelines. The deeper layers, the sophisticated engineering, the evidence of Ice Age construction, all of it has been officially forgotten, sealed behind institutional barriers as effectively as if it had been physically reburied. Let me know in the comments, do you think scientific institutions sometimes suppress discoveries that challenge accepted historical narratives? Because what we're about to explore next shows that Mount Padang isn't the only site where inconvenient evidence has been quietly swept aside. The strangeness of Mount Padang goes beyond just its controversial age. The geometry of the site suggests astronomical alignments, with the entire complex oriented according to specific celestial events. Seismic scans reveal interior voids and chambers that no modern archaeologist has been permitted to explore. Most mysteriously, the construction shows evidence of multiple building phases, as if successive generations built upon and modified the work of their predecessors over thousands of years. Like Göbekli Tepe, Mount Padang appears to have been deliberately buried by its ancient creators, suggesting they were preserving something important for future discovery. But unlike Göbekli Tepe, Mount Padang has been buried twice. Once by its ancient builders, and again by modern academics unwilling to confront what it might mean for our understanding of human history. This pattern of institutional suppression raises disturbing questions about the nature of knowledge itself. How many other sites around the world might contain similar evidence? How many discoveries have been made but never published? Investigated but never acknowledged? Found but they seem to mock our modern understanding of prehistoric human limitations. At Baalbek in Lebanon, 3 foundation stones of the Temple of Jupiter each weigh over 800 tons. That's equivalent to about 400 automobiles compressed into single limestone blocks. They were quarried from a site nearly a mile away, transported uphill, and placed with such precision that the joints between them are too narrow for a knife blade to penetrate. But even more mysterious is the unfinished block still lying in Baalbek's ancient quarry. Known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, it measures over 60 feet long, 14 feet wide, and 13 feet thick, with an estimated weight of 1,200 tons. It was completely cut from the bedrock, except for a small connection at its base, as if the ancient builders had intended to move it, but suddenly stopped work and never returned. Here's what makes this impossible. Modern cranes can lift about 20,000 tons, but they require massive concrete foundations, counterweights, and extensive setup. Moving a 1,200-ton stone block with ancient technology should be completely impossible. Yet there it sits, precisely cut and ready for transport by methods we can't even theorize. When Romans built their temple on top of these massive foundation stones, even their historians acknowledged that the lower levels predated Roman civilization. They called it the work of giants, and perhaps that was the most honest explanation they could offer. In the highlands of Peru, the fortress complex of Sacsayhuaman presents an even more perplexing puzzle. Stone blocks weighing over 200 tons are carved into complex polygonal shapes. No two exactly alike, yet fitted together like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, with no mortar to hold them in place. Some stones have 12 or 14 precisely cut edges that mate perfectly with their neighbors. The precision is so remarkable that these walls have survived earthquakes that destroyed everything else built in the region. Testament to engineering principles that seem to surpass modern understanding. But when Spanish conquistadors asked the Inca who had built these incredible fortifications, they were told the stonework predated their empire. The Inca said they were made by the gods before human memory began. At Puma, tools or any metal implements at these sites forces an uncomfortable question. How do you achieve machine precision stonework using nothing but stone tools and human labor? Hit that like button if you're starting to suspect our ancestors knew things we've forgotten, because what we're about to explore suggests these impossible achievements weren't isolated incidents. They're part of a global pattern that mainstream archaeology can't explain. The conventional explanation for these megalithic sites involves ramps, ropes, levers, and unlimited time and manpower. But this explanation starts to break down when you examine the practical requirements. Moving the Baalbek stones would require coordinating thousands of workers with perfect precision, using rope technology that could support 800-ton loads, and maintaining control over massive objects on inclined surfaces, all without leaving any archaeological evidence of the infrastructure such operations would require. More puzzling still, these sites don't show the gradual development you'd expect from cultures learning monumental construction through trial and error. There are no partially completed practice projects, no simpler, earlier versions, no evidence of the learning curve that should precede such sophisticated achievements. The megalithic sites appear suddenly in the archaeological record, fully formed and technically perfect. At Easter Island, the Moai statues present their own version of this pattern. While the statues themselves are impressive, the real mystery lies in the precisely fitted stone platforms they stand on. Some of these platforms incorporate blocks weighing over 80 tons, fitted together with the same impossible precision found at other megalithic sites worldwide. Recent research has revealed that many Moai were originally full-body statues, with the bodies buried under centuries of accumulated soil. Ground-penetrating radar shows that these heads are actually the tops of complete figures, with elaborate carvings extending deep underground, suggesting the island's history is far more complex and ancient than previously understood. What connects all these sites isn't just their impressive scale, but their shared technical characteristics. Precision stonework that seems to exceed ancient capabilities. Massive blocks moved without apparent regard for weight limitations, and construction techniques that leave no archaeological trace of how they were accomplished. Certain discoveries about how they were built seem to be systematically suppressed or ignored by mainstream archaeology. In recent years, independent researchers using advanced scanning technology, acoustic analysis, and materials science have uncovered evidence that our ancestors may have possessed construction techniques that we're only beginning to understand or rediscover. At Pumapunku, acoustic analysis has revealed that the andesite blocks were cut using some form of high-frequency vibration technology. The cut surfaces show microscopic striations, identical to those produced by modern ultrasonic cutting tools. But, according to accepted archaeology, the people who built Pumapunku had no metal tools, no written language, and no knowledge of advanced physics. Geological analysis of megalithic sites worldwide has revealed another disturbing pattern. Many of the massive stones show evidence of having been softened or made malleable during construction. The blocks at Sacsayhuaman, for instance, show signs of having been molded rather than carved, as if the stone had been temporarily rendered plastic before hardening into its final shape. This isn't speculation based on visual appearance. Advanced materials analysis using electron microscopy and chemical composition studies has documented changes in the crystalline structure of megalithic stones that suggest exposure to unknown energy sources or chemical processes that could temporarily alter the physical properties of solid rock. But here's where the story becomes disturbing. When researchers attempt to publish these findings in mainstream archaeological journals, their papers are consistently rejected, not because of faulty methodology, but because the implications challenge fundamental assumptions about ancient technological capabilities. Dr. Joseph Davidovits, a materials scientist who has spent decades studying ancient construction techniques, has presented compelling evidence that many megalithic blocks weren't carved from quarried stone, but were cast using advanced geopolymer concrete technology. Chemical analysis of samples from sites like the Great Pyramid, Sacsayhuaman, and Pumapunku shows mineral compositions that don't match the local geology, but are consistent with artificially created stone concrete. This would explain how ancient builders achieved such perfect fitting between massive blocks that remain unexplored, because excavation permits are mysteriously denied whenever researchers get too close to investigating them. Local legends speak of underground passages that connect Göbekli Tepe to other ancient sites across the region. But these claims are dismissed as folklore, despite physical evidence suggesting they may be accurate. Electromagnetic anomaly detection at megalithic sites worldwide has revealed that many of these ancient structures were built on locations with unusual geomagnetic properties. The stones themselves often display residual magnetization and electrical conductivity that suggest they may have been part of some form of energy system we don't understand. At Stonehenge, acoustic researchers have discovered that the stone circle was designed with sophisticated knowledge of sound resonance and vibration. The spacing and positioning of the stones create specific acoustic effects that amplify certain frequencies while dampening others. Similar acoustic properties have been found at megalithic sites on different continents, suggesting shared knowledge of advanced sound engineering. But perhaps the most troubling discovery involves the apparent use of precision measurement systems at ancient sites. Megalithic monuments worldwide are built using mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio, incorporated into their dimensions with accuracy that rivals modern engineering. The spacing between stones, the proportions of chambers, and the alignments with astronomical features all show evidence of mathematical knowledge that supposedly wasn't developed until thousands of years later. Research into ancient measurement systems has revealed that megalithic builders used standardized units of measurement that were consistent across vast geographical distances. The megalithic yard, identified by engineer Alexander Thom, appears at sites from Scotland to South America, with precision that suggests coordinated knowledge sharing across supposedly isolated cultures. When mainstream archaeologists are confronted with this evidence, they typically respond with what researchers call the coincidence theory. The idea that apparent sophistication in ancient constructions results from lucky accidents rather than genuine knowledge. But the statistical probability of such widespread coincidences approaches zero, especially when the same mathematical relationships appear repeatedly across different cultures and time periods. The reluctance to investigate ancient largely unexplored, not because it doesn't exist, but because we lack the will to confront what we might find in the depths. Advanced sonar mapping technology has revolutionized our ability to see beneath the waves, and what it's revealing challenges everything we thought we knew about prehistoric human distribution and capabilities. But the most startling discoveries aren't being made in deep ocean trenches. They're being found on the continental shelves that were dry land during the last ice age. Off the coast of India, marine surveys have detected geometric structures on the sea floor that appear to be the remains of extensive urban complexes. These aren't isolated buildings or scattered ruins, but organized city layouts with what appear to be streets, public squares, and monumental architecture arranged in planned patterns too regular to be natural geological formations. The structures lie at depths that correspond to sea levels during the last glacial maximum, suggesting they were built when these areas were habitable dry land. If confirmed through detailed archaeological investigation, these sites would represent urban civilizations that existed thousands of years before accepted timelines for the development of complex societies. But detailed investigation isn't happening. Research permits for comprehensive exploration of these sites are consistently denied. Funding for deep water archaeology mysteriously disappears, and academic careers suffer when marine archaeologists push too hard for permission to investigate underwater anomalies that challenge conventional historical timelines. In the Mediterranean, recent surveys have detected extensive underwater structures that appear to be harbour works, breakwaters, and port facilities of unprecedented sophistication. These aren't simple stone piers or basic docks, but complex maritime engineering projects that suggest advanced understanding of hydraulics, materials science, and large-scale construction coordination. The dating of these underwater installations remains controversial because proper archaeological investigation has been prevented by regulatory barriers and funding limitations that seem designed to prevent rather than encourage discovery. But the structures themselves are undeniably there, lying beneath the waves in configurations that suggest human construction rather than natural geological processes. Perhaps most intriguing are discoveries off the coast of Japan, where underwater surveys have detected what appears to be a massive stepped pyramid that show deliberate extraction of stone blocks and carved symbols that appear to be some form of ancient writing system. The depth of the Yonaguni monument means it was last above water during the post-glacial flooding period, which would place any human construction between 12,000 and 20,000 years ago. But mainstream archaeology continues to classify Yonaguni as a natural formation, despite mounting evidence that its features require artificial explanation. Leave a comment and let me know. Do you think we're avoiding underwater archaeological sites because we're not ready for what we might find down there? The resistance to exploring underwater archaeological sites becomes even more puzzling when you consider that we have unprecedented technology for deep-sea exploration. Remotely operated vehicles, high-resolution sonar mapping, underwater excavation robotics, all the tools necessary for comprehensive archaeological investigation of submerged sites already exist and are routinely used for commercial and military purposes. The only thing preventing systematic exploration of the drowned continental shelves, where human civilizations would have existed during lower sea levels, is institutional resistance that seems designed to prevent rather than encourage discovery. But independent researchers, using private funding and advanced scanning technology, continue to detect anomalous structures on the ocean floor worldwide. Off the coasts of Cuba, Britain, Peru, and dozens of other locations, sonar surveys reveal geometric patterns, artificial structures, and organized layouts that suggest extensive human construction, now lying beneath hundreds of feet of water. What makes these discoveries particularly significant is their global distribution. These aren't isolated anomalies, but part of a worldwide pattern of sophisticated construction activity that occurred during periods when sea levels were much lower than today. If human civilizations really did exist on the now drowned continental shelves, and if those civilizations possessed the advanced construction capabilities suggested by controversial land-based sites, then the majority of human architectural and technological achievement may be lying beneath the waves, waiting for explorers brave enough to challenge institutional resistance to underwater archaeological investigation. The implications are staggering. We may be worldwide and lying beneath the waves on drowned continental shelves. Then why don't we know about it? The answer reveals something uncomfortable about how knowledge is controlled, how inconvenient discoveries are suppressed, and how the official story of human development is maintained, despite mounting evidence that challenges its fundamental assumptions. The process of academic suppression isn't dramatic or conspiratorial. It's bureaucratic, systematic, and surprisingly effective. Research permits are denied for sites that might yield controversial evidence. Funding disappears when projects approach discoveries that challenge accepted timelines. Academic papers presenting inconvenient data are rejected by peer review processes that prioritize consensus over investigation. Researchers who persist in exploring forbidden topics find their careers stalled, their methodology questioned, and their findings dismissed as pseudoscience, regardless of the quality of their evidence. The message is clear. Some discoveries are too dangerous to the established narrative to be allowed into mainstream discourse. But why would there be institutional resistance to expanding our knowledge of human capabilities and achievements? The answer lies in the implications of what we might discover. If human civilizations really did exist before the Great Flood, if our ancestors possessed sophisticated technologies we've lost, if advanced societies were destroyed by natural catastrophes and forgotten through cultural amnesia, then everything we've been taught about human progress, social evolution, and technological development would need fundamental revision. The comfortable narrative of steady progress from primitive hunter-gatherers to modern civilization would be revealed as a recovery story, humanity rebuilding after catastrophic loss, rather than developing capabilities for the first time. This possibility threatens more than academic theories. It challenges assumptions about human nature, social organization, and our relationship with the natural world that underpin modern political, economic, and educational systems. If our ancestors achieved sophistication comparable to or exceeding our own, then perhaps the difficulties we face aren't inevitable aspects of human development, but problems that have been solved before and could be solved again using knowledge we've forgotten. The flood stories that appear in cultures worldwide may preserve more than trauma and mythology. They may be important than developing new technologies. Subscribe if you're ready to question the official story of human development, because the evidence suggests we're not the first human civilization to reach sophisticated technological capabilities. We're just the first to forget that others came before us. The Great Forgetting wasn't just about losing specific technologies or construction techniques. It was about losing memory itself, the cultural continuity that preserves knowledge across generations and catastrophes. When rising seas destroyed coastal civilizations and displaced populations worldwide, the survivors faced immediate challenges of basic survival that left little energy for preserving complex knowledge systems. Technical information that required specialized training and institutional support was the first to be lost. But some knowledge survived in compressed form, encoded in myths, rituals, and stories that could be transmitted orally across generations, even when the original context was forgotten. The flood narratives, the astronomical alignments at megalithic sites, the mathematical relationships embedded in ancient architecture, all of these may represent survival strategies for preserving essential information through periods of cultural collapse. Understanding this process reveals why recovering lost knowledge is so difficult. We're not just looking for missing artifacts or hidden technologies. We're trying to decode information that was deliberately compressed into symbolic systems designed to survive the collapse of everything else. The monuments our ancestors buried, the stories they encoded in mythology, the mathematical relationships they built into sacred architecture. All of these may have been attempts to create cultural time capsules that could preserve crucial information through whatever catastrophe they saw coming. Standing at the edge of our own technological civilization, facing environmental changes and social challenges that threaten our continuity, perhaps the most important question isn't whether advanced prehistoric civilizations existed. Perhaps the most important question is, what did they try to teach us? And are we wise enough to listen? The evidence is there, waiting beneath controversial hills, hidden in plain sight at megalithic monuments, and sleeping beneath the waves on drowned continental shelves. The question is whether we have the courage to challenge institutional resistance. Fun is ours. Accept the comfortable narrative of steady human progress, or investigate the uncomfortable possibility that we're living in the shadow of achievements we've forgotten, capabilities we've lost, and knowledge that could change everything if we were brave enough to recover it. The flood came once before. The question is, what will we save when it comes again?